A game between nations, where the participants are not only shouldering the hopes and dreams of their respective peoples, but also their very lives. Where the stakes are the highest they can be in No Game, No Life, as two agents of plenipotentiary, two representatives of a given race clash in a game, where a loss will often result in that given race being put at a massive disadvantage, if not crippling it entirely. And the first we see of that in No Game, No Life is the clash between Humanity and the War Beasts, a game that had been orchestrated by Blank to put the War Beasts in the palm of their hands. One of the most bloodthirsty races from the times of the Great War, with that animosity continuing until today. These are the enemies that Sora and Shiro has decided to take on in their first step to conquer the entirety of the game of Disboard, and eventually challenge Tet. And what game is it that these bloodthirsty war beasts came up with? Lover Loved 2, which is definitely not a game that you would think that the War Beasts would come up with. You think it'd be much more violent, not as moe, but of course this is very appealing to the children of the War Beast Nation, and so their tastes have changed with the times. Regardless, this is still within expectations of what Sora and Shiro were planning for the game to be. This is certainly the most clear example of where a game had been won before it even began. The same is also true for Existence Othello, as Sora was in control of that entire game throughout all of it, leading Kurumi to make specific plays, to give over all of his memories, etc. But in Love or Loved 2, although there were certainly chances taken throughout this game, Sora had declared checkmate in that initial meeting between himself, Shiro, Steph, Jibril, and Izuna and Ino. He declared checkmate, which, as we find out at the end of the game, is a declaration that the game is already over, that he has already won. Everything that happens is within expectations, for the most part. There's definitely still some panic that goes on there, but the trust between Sora and Shiro, the fact that they will always compensate for what the other is lacking, pulls through. And the way it's depicted in the anime is mostly accurate to the way it's depicted in the light novel, but with some very slight changes, including at the end of the game, which I feel is honestly extremely significant for Izuna, of all characters involved. And the anime, I think, kind of does a disservice to her character by making the change that they did. And in doing so, I think some of the point of the game for Izuna, learning that games should be fun, is kind of lost with that change. And I look forward to hearing what you guys think down in the comments below when, we get to that point. So, without further ado, let's get into the game. Now, for starters, it's very important to note that Sora and Shiro knew what kind of game this was going to be. They knew it was going to be a first-person shooter, thanks to the descriptions that the Old King gave. However, the Old King had no knowledge of Sora and Shiro's world, had no idea what these screens and what virtual reality was, so Sora and Shiro had to interpret this from the Old King's descriptions, and the game that the Old King played may not have been Lover Loved 2 or Lover Loved 1. I'm curious what happened with Lover Loved 1 and how it was replaced so quickly, but just learning that it was a first-person shooter was probably enough information for Sora and Shiro to come up with a game plan and know that they were going to be able to dominate, because as they mention in the anime, both in the light novel as well, Shiro holds all of the records in the first-person shooters thanks to her demonic abilities of calculation. One thing that Sora and Shiro certainly didn't expect, though, is upon entering the game that they would be returned to their world, at least upon their initial perception, which gave them the shock that they immediately thought that they were doomed, because this is their home turf. This is Tokyo. And, well, their lives in Tokyo as shut-ins, they couldn't handle the real world in Tokyo, and so they completely shut down, until being reminded that this is a virtual world. This is a world that someone in the War Beast Nation thought up. This is make-believe. Just as in our reality, there are many people who think up their own realities, alternate universes, and different worlds that would exist, so too is it with the War Beast Nation, that there are many other maps that they would play on, many other worlds that they would imagine into existence. And so, I'm guessing the Old King, in the 8 times that he challenged the Eastern Federation, may not have ever played on this map. Maybe this map only became popular with the youth very recently. Maybe it was a map that was only recently designed, or something of that nature. Regardless, Isora and Shiro were woefully unprepared for that. Thankfully, Blank was able to snap out of it, and upon learning the rules from Ino Hatsuse, they were quickly able to grasp the scope of this game, knowing that they would be able to use it to their advantage, because of their experiences with it in their own world. The rules that Ino told them, however, weren't all of the rules in the game. They still had to figure out some things themselves. The rules that they were told involved the love power and how the lovey-dovey guns, as they called them, worked. That firing bullets from their guns used up love power, and that love power can be replenished by shooting the NPCs that are around. Those NPCs are drawn to their own love power, and if they touch you, they drain your love power. Once you have no love power left, the NPCs will leave you alone, and you're effectively knocked out of the game. If you are shot by Izuna, or more globally, someone on the opposing team, you become a love slave of that individual. You join the opposing team, but you can be taken back by being shot by an ally. And on top of that, an ally could also shoot you to replenish your love power should you happen to run out as well. Lastly, though, is that all of their stats in-game reflect their real-world stats, which is incredibly important. Also, magic cannot be used in the virtual world, so Jabril is cut off from what makes her most powerful. However, she's still a force to be reckoned with, as her physical stats still push towards the physical limits that are possible in Disboard. So from the beginning, upon starting this game, Izuna saw Jabril as the only threat on Sora and Shiro's team. She disregarded the Imanities at all, thinking them just lesser beings, and the only one that is a threat is Jabril. It is only because of Jabril that Izuna did not attack at the beginning of the game right away. She was hesitating and waiting to see what Jabril would do. This gave time for Sora and Shiro to, well, in Izuna's eyes, run around lollygagging, enjoying the game, having fun while so much was at stake. But it wasn't just that they were having fun, they were learning more about the specifics of the games. Sora and Shiro were running around, firing at the NPCs. Sora, of course, was having fun determining how many clothes they could take off of the NPCs before they disappeared, but Shiro was actually determining the specs of the lovey-dovey gun in and of itself. She was able to determine that the bullets traveled at a speed of 300 meters per second. They had a range of 400 meters, and the ricochet that was possible with the bullets was completely linear and elastic, meaning that when a bullet ricocheted, it did not lose any momentum, and whatever surface it interacted with, if it hit a flat surface at a 50-degree angle, it would ricochet at a 50-degree angle as well. It is completely elastic and only limited by the range of the gun, meaning that bullet will continue to ricochet until it's traveled 400 meters, which is kind of insane to think about, especially when we consider later on how many bullets are fired all at once and how much Izuna has to escape. Not only that, how much Shiro has to calculate to be able to intercept all of the bullets that Izuna fires. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself here. After determining the parameters of the game, Blank is finally ready to make their first move against Izuna. So Sora, Shiro, and Jabril go off to make that first raid, leaving Steph behind as, at that point in the game, she's kinda dead weight. And that's exactly what they want everyone else to believe, so they pay no attention to her. The first step is finding out where Izuna is located. This was done by Shiro calculating the probability of where Izuna was hiding based on environmental factors around them, things like vantage points and line of sight. In other words, what location would be the likeliest for Izuna to go to get an advantage over Team Blank. And so, once it was determined where the likeliest location that Izuna would be, they set their plan into motion. It is notable that Shiro was determining this through probability, which is not a guarantee. We're not exactly sure if the first building they checked was the correct one, which seems to be the case, since the likeliest place for Izuna to hide would probably be where she would determine to hide, because she didn't think that anyone would be able to calculate that. So I'm guessing Shiro was right most of the time on the first guess, if not all the time throughout this game. Once they determined the likeliest location, though, they set their plan into motion. Sora would go 300 meters away, Jabril would go to the top of the building, and Shiro would go to confront Izuna directly. Now, the place that Izuna had chosen to hide was a small room with a single exit, and there were a number of NPC girls wandering around out front of the room. I'm not really sure why the NPCs didn't go after Izuna to be drawn to her love power or anything, but still, she had those as an extra kind of shield. And once Shiro entered within a 100-meter radius of Izuna, Izuna could sense everything going on. Essentially, Izuna's hearing gave her a 100-meter radar around herself. She could hear everything going on within that range. Obviously, Warby's senses have a much larger range than that. She could probably hear things from much farther away than 100 meters, but within 100 meters, she can sense every little minute sound that is going on. And so, Izuna waited and listened, not exactly sure if her position had been compromised just yet. But with every shot of Shiro's gun, a girl was dropping outside that door. Perfect headshot every single time. And so, once all the girls were gone, Izuna knew that her location had been compromised, and fired a single shot that was supposed to ricochet twice and then take Shiro out with a headshot as well. But as Izuna listened, nothing happened. And more importantly, the slow and steady pace that Shiro was walking picked up speed. She started running. A very important thing to note, because Sora had told Shiro to keep her running to a minimum, to conserve her energy. But the moment that Izuna fired that gun, it confirmed to Shiro that she was in the right building. She was calculating the probability of Izuna's location, so she didn't know for sure. Once she did, though, she stopped conserving her energy and started running. Which, in Izuna's mind, an humanity running should not be anything that should cause her any sort of concern. It's an humanity. Someone that she didn't even consider as a threat. The only threat that she saw was Jabril, but this is where Shiro became the most threatening person to Izuna, because Izuna fired another shot, and then she heard the ricochets as Shiro fired a shot as well, and intercepted her bullet that ricocheted with a ricochet of her own. Izuna then realized that the 100-meter radius that she thought was her space, that she knew everything going on in, was actually completely controlled by Shiro. By her insane, demonic powers of calculation, she was able to predict the likeliest outcome of everything, the shots that opponents would take, and she was able to calculate the proper trajectory to fire a shot of her own to accurately intercept it. So she didn't have to slow down at all and closed in on Izuna, who, in her desperation, threw a bomb to try to get it out of the door and use it as a cover for her escape. But immediately after doing so, she realized her mistake, as Shiro was able to shoot the bomb, predicting that that's what Izuna would do, before the bomb even exited the room. So all Izuna ended up doing was providing cover for Shiro, so that Shiro could kick down the door, get into the room that Izuna was in, and at that point Izuna knew that she needed to escape. So she fired a whole bunch of bullets, creating a bullet hell, and darted for the window. But each of those bullets from her bullet hell were not only stopped by Shiro ricocheting bullets off of them, but also in that position where Izuna had been hiding. All of those bullets came together and collided in that point. If Izuna had waited even a second longer, there would have been a rain of bullets on her. And so it was lucky for her that she fled when she did. Or was it? As the moment that she burst through that window, she saw above her the Flugel, the one who she initially saw as the biggest threat. Still a threat nonetheless, because according to Jabril in the light novel, much to her dismay, without her magic, physically, she is about even with the werebeasts. So outside of the previous knowledge and experience Izuna has with this game, Jabril is the one who can go toe-to-toe with her, keeping up with her strength, her speed, etc., and why she is still a very prominent threat. Seeing Jabril appear above her is of course enough to make Izuna panic just a little bit. Not enough where she lost her senses though, as she saw Jabril throwing a bomb and she immediately realized that it was cover, it was a distraction. So Izuna fired 3 shots, even though the amount of shots that were heard were only 2. That's how fast Izuna fired. She shot first at Jabril to take her out, then the second to shoot the bomb, and a third in anticipation of Jabril dodging the first. The going thought being that when someone dodges in mid-air, it's going to take them a couple seconds to be able to reorient themselves and to be able to dodge again. So, after dodging that first bullet, Jabril would not be able to dodge the third, and that indeed was the case. However, just before that second bullet collided with the bomb, creating an explosion that would have deafened Izuna, Jabril noticed Izuna turn her head towards where Sora was waiting on a different building. For when that bomb exploded, Sora shot 2 bullets of his own, using the sound of the bomb exploding as cover. One to shoot towards Izuna, and one to take back Jabril. And this is where the light novel and anime differ a little bit. The entire falling sequence, Izuna is falling close enough to the building to be able to use that as a foothold and reorient herself in the air as she jumps off of it, instead of just free falling all the way down. In the light novel, it is that free fall. So when Sora shoots that bullet towards Izuna, she's able to dodge mid-air, however, one of her hanging sleeves gets caught by that bullet. And then it is Shiro who fires from her vantage point on the 8th floor of that building. She fires towards Izuna, and that is the bullet that Izuna cannot dodge, and so needs to use her other hanging sleeve as a shield. That is how Team Blank figures out that they can use clothing as a shield, a rule that they were not told upon starting this game, giving Izuna the advantage knowing more about the game than they do. But they've now figured out that rule. And also, it was determined that upon shooting Jabril, it took 15 seconds for her to return to her normal senses after being hit, as being hit by a love bullet turns someone into a love slave, as they determined earlier with Steph, both shooting herself, Jabril shooting Shiro, Shiro shooting Sora, etc. But it takes 15 seconds to recover from that, something that they probably would have determined already with the events that transpired in the anime with the entire love triangle that Jabril was trying to set up between herself, Sora, and Shiro. But nonetheless, they have determined more about the game, and so they're taking this into their calculations and preparing for their next strike. In the anime, we do see time pass. We see the sky go from what looks like midday to evening into night, and at this point in time, in the light novel, it is stated that 2 hours have passed when we see Sora and Shiro, as well as Jabril, at the park, with Shiro furiously writing on the ground. By this point, they have already led 4 other raids against Izuna that have all ended in failure. That is why Sora is missing one of his shirts, Shiro is missing most of her sailor uniform, and Jabril is missing a couple of the accents on her outfit, which really isn't that substantial to begin with, but she's probably just taken a couple grazing shots. It's not gone into the content of each of these raids, just that they ended in failure, and so their backs are now against the wall, which does give a little bit more context to the line that Sora says when he mentions that they're just winging it at this point. Steph shows up again at this point, a love slave of Izuna, and is quickly taken out by Sora. Sora shoots all of her clothes, and then Jabril is told to take the handicap by Sora, and Jabril's the one who does the finishing shot, shooting Steph between the eyes, and so Steph is now momentarily in love with Jabril. And in the light novel, we cut to see Ino's reaction to this. He communicates to Izuna that, apparently they show no mercy to their allies as well as their enemies, showing just how ruthless they are, and further proving that caution may need to be taken as well. Shiro is still writing out her calculations, and we see her calculation ends, and in the anime, she leaves it blank, which I actually like much better than what the light novel does, where Shiro writes the answer as B, standing for her brother. But leaving it blank shows that blank is the answer. Both Sora and Shiro together, not just B, which was supposed to represent her brother. I really like the little subtle change there that the anime did. And with this sequence, things play out pretty much exactly the same. Izuna shows up just as Shiro predicted, and so Shiro jumps in the way, taking a bullet for Sora. Shiro turns to Izuna's side, and Jabril realizes they need to get the hell out of there. So she takes Sora and flees. Sora, racking his brain to think why Shiro would take the bullet for him, comes to that one realization that this was all part of Shiro's calculations. Shiro turning to Izuna's side is part of the plan. And so, Sora asks Jabril to go take on Izuna while he goes to deal with Shiro. Of course, Jabril's very cocky, and Sora just blatantly tells her, yeah, this is where you die acting like that. Overconfidence, famous last words, yeah, you're going down. And Jabril still is pretty confident in herself, as a Flugel is, being the god killers that they are. They know they are superior to pretty much everyone else on Disboard, but that's also part of the charm of Jabril's character. So she goes off to engage Izuna, who is very hesitant to engage the Flugel, as not only is Izuna aware that it is an opponent pretty much equal in physical capabilities to her, but also instinctively, well, the Great War kind of ingrained into the blood and genetics of the war beasts that Flugel are something to be feared. Regardless, Izuna takes on Jabril, and as we see later on, is able to overcome that enemy. Meanwhile, Sora is dealing with Shiro, as Shiro is slowly and methodically running him down. Well, specifically not running. Walking him down, I guess, but going after him and firing bullets that are difficult for Sora to dodge. He's having to anticipate how Shiro would think, and it's honestly, from the depiction of the light novel, not easy for him to avoid a number of Shiro's shots. We see a little bit more of the chase that's happening between Sora and Shiro in the light novel than we do in the anime, but ultimately they do end up on the top of that building, and this is exactly where Shiro wanted Sora to be. It's not directly stated in the light novel, but it does seem to be implied, and it's practically a guarantee that Shiro was directly leading Sora to that specific building where she calculated the NPCs were. In fact, she had to be leading him to that building because that's where the NPC carrying Steph was going to end up. So they end up at the top of that building, Sora out of breath and could only think of one thing to do: charge directly at Shiro and not dodge, something that she wouldn't anticipate. And so he's able to get to his sister, and upon hugging her, both jump off of the building. He feigns to shoot her and turn her back to his side by shooting her clothing, and that is when Izuna jumps out to attack, thinking that Shiro wouldn't have full control over her senses because she'd just been turned to Sora's side once again. Which also makes me question why Izuna didn't think that Shiro wouldn't have full control over her senses when Izuna shot her in the first place. Unless the same is not true when Izuna shoots someone on the opposing team, that they keep their senses instead of having that 15-second delay. We're not really sure, but for the fact that Izuna believed Shiro turned her gun on Sora immediately after being shot, I guess that has to be the case. Regardless, Izuna took this opportunity to go and attack, but the first thing Izuna noticed after starting her attack was that Sora had a bomb in his hand. He threw it haphazardly at Izuna, and she shot it reflexively, which, of course, immediately regretted, as it not only disoriented both her hearing and sight, it also provided cover for her enemy, and without hesitation, a bullet flew through the smoke, directed precisely at Izuna, forcing her to dodge. Izuna realized that Sora shouldn't be capable of this precision. That was precision that she knew from Shiro. And so once the smoke cleared, she saw that it wasn't Sora who fired, but Shiro. And that is when she realized that she had been deceived. That Shiro had not only deceived her, but everyone watching, including her brother. And it's explained at the end of the game that this was only possible because Shiro had complete faith in her brother, and so pretty much went no thoughts, head empty, though still being able to calculate her shots and everything. Like, she had to make sure that her heartbeat remained calm and flat the entire time. No excitement, no irregular heartbeat, no nothing. And so she had to focus a lot of her brain power to keep her body in that state, while still acting like Izuna's ally. And to do so, she had to deceive even her brother. Izuna at this moment thought that that was the final trick, and so, with Jabril jumping out behind her, thought that she had won. But Shiro fired another bullet, and Izuna realized that it was not aimed at her. Her warbeast senses were screaming, as Shiro's bullet collided with the bullet that Jabril had just fired, and ricocheted off it, coming towards her. Left with no other choice, Izuna activated her Blood Break, the ability that few warbeasts possessed, the ability to surpass physical limits, essentially just break physics. And so Izuna is able to grasp the air and push off of the condensed air that she had in her palms, essentially, as Blank put it, allowing her to double jump and dodge out of the way of the bullet. She then fires 2 shots to take out Sora and Shiro, but Sora is able to block with his shoes. Everyone lands on the ground, and the moment they land, Sora and Shiro frantically run from Izuna, who, in her blood break state, is able to travel at speeds that break the sound barrier. They weave through alleys, trying to fire shots at Izuna just to make sure that they can get away and get to the spot that Shiro had calculated. Upon getting there, though, they are unable to overwhelm Izuna, and with a few well-placed shots, she is able to take out Sora and Shiro. As she calms her blood, thinking that she's won, that is when she is finally shot by Steph, riding the back of an NPC, just before her love power ran out, after it had been restored by the bullet that Shiro fired and ricocheted off of Jabril's bullet while they were falling from the building. Steph had been carried by that NPC, that bullet made contact with her, restored her love power, and allowed her to take this final shot. This entire plan having been set up before the game even began. Sora using the pledges to make it so Steph would obey any order that Shiro wrote on the ground, but forget it immediately afterwards, so that Izuna would not be able to sense the intent behind Steph's shot that would eventually take her out of the game. Her War Beast senses would not trigger, and so Blank was declared the victors. But this final sequence, as I mentioned, is different in the anime and the light novel. I always found it weird when watching the anime how Sora and Shiro were able to outrun Izuna in her blood break state. She's literally able to jump off of the air, break the laws of physics. She travels at speeds that break the sound barrier. Physical capabilities are the same as they are in real life. Two shut-ins can outrun Izuna? Really? I always found that weird, how Shiro would calculate a distance that's at least a city block or two away, and the plan was to outrun Izuna for that long? It didn't really make any sense, and that's because in the light novel, well, that didn't happen. Those two shots that Izuna fired immediately upon entering her blood break, that Sora, in the anime, blocked with his shoes, yeah, he didn't block those in the light novel. They collided with Sora and Shiro, and that is when they were turned to Izuna's side, which, in my opinion, makes a lot more sense for numerous reasons. Upon landing, Izuna is in her blood break state, in that frenzy that it puts her into, and Ino calls out to her, telling her to calm her blood. And as she does so, she is left exhausted. I'm going to be making a separate video on blood break in and of itself at some point in the future. Not right away, because there's other instances in the light novels that I want to cover in that video, and we need to cover those specific chapters in the light novel first. But essentially, the blood break pretty much destroys the body of the user whenever it's activated. Their cells and muscles are damaged. The scarlet that we see staining Izuna's fur and her skin is actually her blood bursting from her veins. Like, it is very physically demanding, and so she's left vulnerable once deactivating it for Steph to take that shot. In the light novel, the rule that Steph was put under was after her love power is restored, take a shot 10 seconds afterwards. So instead of waiting until her love power is almost depleted, Steph takes a shot 10 seconds afterwards. If the NPC is already carrying Steph and moving right underneath of that building so that Steph's power could be restored by the shot that Shiro fired, why wouldn't Steph take the shot right then and there, right? It makes sense, and that's because, well, that's when she does take the shot. Not waiting for the NPC to meander all the way to the same spot that Sora and Shiro were running towards with a blood-broken Izuna chasing after them at the speed of sound. Like, the NPC wouldn't have been able to make it to that same location, now that I'm thinking about it, at the same pace that Sora, Shiro, and Izuna would. They would have had to buy time as well, and it just, it makes more sense this way. But I do understand, to some extent, why the anime would choose to alter the ending in this way. Extend the time that Izuna is in her blood break to showcase her blood break and the insane physical prowess that it comes with, and have Sora and Shiro flee from Izuna, and then eventually have that ending sequence at that point where Sora and Shiro tell Izuna that they are opponents that Izuna could never defeat, which Izuna accepts extremely quickly in the anime, but in the light novel, she actually is a little bit more difficult to convince. In fact, it takes a whole other game after this point for Izuna to come to believe that. Sora challenges Izuna to a separate game after this one, immediately afterwards, and that's something completely cut from the anime and will be covered in my next video. But as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, changing events in this way kind of does a disservice to Izuna. She activated her blood break and then is chasing Sora and Shiro, two helpless imanities in the face of a war beast that is breaking the laws of physics. But she's chasing them around and isn't able to take them out until she finally corners them, until they're finally out of breath, until they've actually led her to the place where they want her to be. You could argue in the anime that, well, she was having fun. And I think that's part of what they wanted to showcase as well. Izuna is finally having fun playing the game. Now this is getting fun, please. And so, because she was having fun, she didn't try to end the game sooner. Do you see the issue with that? The entire lesson that Sora was trying to teach Izuna is that games should be fun. But after this match would be over, realistically, Izuna would have reflected on this and realized that if she didn't have fun, if she didn't chase Sora and Shiro around in her blood break, if she just ended it then and there, because in her blood break state, she fired 2 bullets at Sora and Shiro when they were falling, but that's it? She could easily have fired more. Perhaps she was out of her love power and had to dash away at the speed of sound, shoot a couple NPCs, restore her power, and then go back to chase after them, but that's never touched on in the anime and doesn't really seem that likely. Given Izuna being able to travel at the speed of sound, would be able to do so in a matter of seconds, come back and finish Sora and Shiro, possibly even before they even recovered from hitting the ground. So Izuna, because she was having fun, allowed herself to be led to the spot where she would lose in the anime. And that would mean that if she didn't have fun, if she took the game seriously, then she would have won by taking out Sora and Shiro right when they fell. But in the light novel, because she did take out Sora and Shiro the moment that they fell, she thought she had won then and there, but was defeated by Sora and Shiro's strategy. There is no extra gap where it would leave for Izuna to be extremely hard on herself for having fun. She had fun and gave it her all, still went for the win at every single opportunity, but still lost, regardless of whether she had fun or not. That is why the depiction of the game in the light novel is, in my opinion, much better than the game in the anime. Though the game in the anime, still a spectacle, still I love it, but for Izuna's character, it makes more sense that she was able to overwhelm Sora and Shiro the moment she goes into her blood break, because it doesn't leave opportunity for her to doubt herself later. Now in the anime, she doesn't doubt herself later. After this game, she fully believes Sora and Shiro and is fully on their side, but logically, that option would still exist. If Izuna didn't have fun, she would have won. And also, in terms of blood break, I know Izuna is a prodigy. She is an 8-year-old that was chosen to represent the Eastern Union, the entirety of her race. She's definitely a prodigy at this game. Not only that, but she's a prodigy for the fact that she's an 8-year-old war beast who can activate her blood break. I don't think it's really that realistic that Izuna can activate her blood break for, I would assume, what would be a matter of minutes for Sora and Shiro to shut in Neats to be able to run all the way a city block to back to their starting point where they were able to corner Izuna. She had her blood break active that entire time. I don't think an 8-year-old would be that experienced with blood break, but there's no real way to tell. Though I will mention that in the light novel, Izuna does not activate her blood break for that length of time ever again that we see. Maybe will happen in later volumes. The light novels are still ongoing, but I just think from the strain it would put on an 8-year-old's body, probably they can't activate it for long. Just a momentary activation, Izuna can pop both Sora and Shiro in the head, and the moment that she lands, she needs to get out of her blood break for risk of, destroying her body because she's 8 years old. Which would also give a much more clear distinction in experience between Izuna and the Shrine Maiden, who can also go into blood break and has much better control over her senses and spatial awareness that we see in the coin flip later on. So with all that being said, hopefully my rambling on this game made sense. I think I talked for quite a bit longer than I expected to on the events that took place in Love or Loved 2, the game between nations, the battle between humanity and the war beasts. Let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. If you've only watched the anime, a few of the things that I mentioned were definitely new coming from the light novel, and I highly encourage you to pick up the light novel if you want to see what is, in my opinion, a better rendition of events. Definitely a good depiction of it in the anime, and still a spectacle, still one I love, as I've mentioned already, but the light novel is just a little bit better for the things I described. Let me know if you agree or disagree. And if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and join the Daily Flugel. If you're also interested in discussing No Game No Life with me while I'm live on Twitch, I stream every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. So feel free to come and say hi there. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Ashente.